Hi, I'm Joe Feeks, editor of Poultry Health Today, and I'm with Frank Singleton of Frank Singleton Communications in Atlanta. And Frank, you're not just a specialist in public relations, but you've got, like more than 20 years experience in the food industry.
Right, I've worked with clients on their brand and risk and reputation management, issues management, of course a lot of media relations that goes with that, and certainly just helping clients tell their story to retail, business to business, consumer audiences. So primarily communications work, for the most part with a PR and media emphasis.
Well, as you may have guessed, the industry I want to focus on today is poultry. And one of the things I keep hearing, not just at this meeting, but at others, but that poultry industry is not doing a good job of telling its story. The antibiotics controversy is one good example of that. What, in your mind, as a PR consultant in the food industry, what can the poultry industry be doing better in terms of telling their story?
Well, I think actually the very beginning of that statement, telling the story, is probably the crux of what they could do better. In this industry, it's a scientifically driven industry. It has implications on human health and wellness and those kinds of things. And so we have a lot of information, a lot of data. From a metric standpoint, we can make the case pretty well that our product's good or wholesome or healthy, but I think at the end of the day, we need to be able to tell a story that people can relate to, that makes that relevant to them and their needs, whether that's relevant to things like antibiotics. When people think they have the entire story, they actually don't. They don't understand the implications on flock health, on human health, or perhaps even on cost. And at the end of the day, a lot of the science that goes into poultry production has to do with producing a product that people want, that they're willing to pay for. You have to tell them that story, and they have to make an emotional connection to it. If you just throw data at them, you're essentially at some point arguing with them if they don't believe that story.
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned earlier that we've got some great scientific data in this industry, but when you start throwing data at consumers, they tend to glaze over, and some of them have their minds made up anyway. So how do you go about building and framing that story?
Joe, I think you have to let people tell the story, and scientists are people too. And I think if there were a way to articulate through the scientists themselves and let them help tell that story about human health and about due diligence and about cautionary and extremely strident precautions that are taken in the food industry to make sure that product's ready to go to market. You can look at some examples. The petroleum and oil industry comes through a crisis. And generally how they do that when they have a crisis is to begin to tell their story of a cleanup or mitigation or whatever it is they're doing. They begin to let people tell that story, because at the end of the day, people want to hear it from other people. They want to hear a story of scientists gathering together to bring their best information forward, to use process. But at the end of the day, there has to be a human component to that to make that emotional connection to consumers. Otherwise, it's just information, and we all suffer from information overload now.
Now, a lot of consumers these days are not getting their news from newspapers or TV. They're going to Facebook and other social media outlets. So how does the poultry industry begin to manage that and get its word out through social media?
Well, one of the things to look at in terms of social media is influence. Who are the influencers in the space that you really want to reach, and what are the channels through which they're going to be reached? Are there influencers, whether those people are bloggers or scientists or specific websites where people get their information and feel that information is credible? You find those vectors, you find the path to that consumer, and you'll find a way to get that information across to tell that story. But to try to just blanket the digital stratosphere, if you will, with information, and to throw information and hope that people will be interested enough to take your word for it, it's not going to happen. But if you hit the right influencers and you let other people tell your story with some credibility as well, and you begin to build some relationships with those audiences by associating with the right influencers who have credibility, your story has relevance and it has resonance, and it begins to get traction, and people begin to see that you're actually trying to communicate instead of just give them information. You and I talked before about there used to be audiences, but there aren't audiences anymore. There are participants now, and so everybody's in on the conversation. And To a large degree, the industry has let the participants drive a lot of the commentary and even make some suppositions about what is good or bad about particular issues, whether that's antibiotic or free range or organic. So without engaging in that dialogue and telling a story that can be backed up with some information, they've missed an opportunity to influence a great group of people that could be part of their storytelling asset.
And I've talked to a lot of veterinarians while I've been here in Atlanta, and they've expressed concern to me about this antibiotic-free movement that has been gripping the industry. You know, everybody's in favor of giving consumers what they want, and that's fine, but it creates an ethical dilemma for veterinarians because these are people that have taken an oath to provide a certain level of care, and now they're being told by consumers or the marketing department of a company that they can't use certain drugs anymore. Do you have any advice for, let's say, the veterinary industry for getting their story told about the need to keep medical decisions in the hands of a veterinarian?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's part of that storytelling, and the connection is back to the point where it does meet human health or it meets ethical concerns in terms of treatment of animals, those kinds of things. But if they don't tell the story with a human voice, and whether that's on blog, social media, through webcasting, those kinds of things, or in general consumption in newspapers or magazines or on the general news, if they don't tell the story, if the story is produced and distributed by what you might call a corporate mouthpiece or a collateral piece or data-driven points of view, it's hard to believe it. It's harder to believe it. And, there's an entire supply chain that goes with this conversation, from farm to fork, if you will. And every piece of that, there are a million vignettes that can be told that people would believe and agree with if there were a connection to a story that made it important to them or relevant to them. And that's all about identifying, who else is an influencer in this space? Who are some of the organizations perhaps that decry antibiotics? Is there a way to, if not have a conversation with them, at least engage the same audience and offer a counterpoint? It's very difficult to do. The industry, like any other industry, has a difficult time when you're going to get some criticism and some indignation, and that there's an organized effort to silence your point of view or at least to dismiss your point of view. But I think that makes it all the more important to get out there, because at some point, we live in an information age, and people are going to go out and they're going to vet their experiences or the things that they consume. No one goes on a vacation. We don't go to a movie or a restaurant without Googling it up and seeing what other people's experiences are. So that there's a repository for truth and information, but you have to engage it and be a part of it. And to do that, you have to be transparent. You have to recognize you're going to be asked some hard questions. You have to be able to candidly and straightforwardly tell what it is you know and where it is you have started from. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be getting better. And again, I went back to the petroleum industry. There's some great examples there. You think about Exxon Valdez and where they were at the very pit of public opinion in the late 80s. And I think they made more than any other petroleum company last year in terms of net profit. So they've made their change and they've articulated their point of view. You can look at companies like Interface, which is a carpet manufacturing company. The CEO of that company, he got evangelized, if you will, around waste and sustainability. And now sustainability is at the center of their message. And so they make carpet, and carpet has byproducts, and that's not all positive. And they're not perfect, but they're trying to do better, and they're trying to be more transparent and tell that story in ways that are relevant to people so that people don't just make a purely emotional decision without some facts.
Great points, Frank. Thank you so much. We've been talking to Frank Singleton of Frank Singleton Communications in Atlanta. Frank, thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, Joe.